There's no one like you, and there never will be.
From the producer of Bohemian Rhapsody, there are many legends, but there is only one. Michael, rated PG-13, in theaters April 24.
Welcome back to the Epic Universal Podcast. I'm entertainment writer Jim Hill, and this is the podcast where we discuss the latest Universal news, rumors, and history. And as always, I'm joined by Eric Hersey, and we've now done this 100 times, Eric.
Can you believe it, Jim? You kept me around. I didn't get shooed off by all the people that weren't quite happy that I didn't go to Universal for the first, 25 episodes? We made it.
We made it. And by the way, we got a special little bit of, recognition, which, by the way, again, remember with this podcast, folks, we are contractually obligated to talk about Wicked at some point during the course of the show. But this is kind of a different thing for Wicked, Eric. That got this note. Congratulations on your 100th podcast from the Broadway cast of Wicked.
No way.
There we go. A cast member reached out, and this is the message he wanted to share with the two of us. As of this month, April of 2026, we've done 8,700 performances, over 8,700 performances here at the Gershwin Theater. That makes them the fourth longest running show in Broadway history. And so they say, you and Eric have a little catching up to do.
Yeah, but, a little bit.
But here's hoping that the Epic Universal Podcast, just like the Broadway version of Wicked, settles in for a good long run. So isn't that sweet?
That was awesome. No, that's fantastic. Jim, I was pulling out some numbers because I was like, all right, we've done 100 episodes, but I was like, I wonder where Jim sits and how many podcasts you've recorded. So we don't quite hit the 8,700. We're just not, although I like to tell people it's a sausage factory here at the Jim Hill Media Network.
It is.
You were like, boom, 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 story, boom, 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 story.
Yep.
Jim, any guess how many podcasts you think you've done? These are the ones that I could figure out.
Oh, it's gotta be north of 2,000 at this point, right?
You're pretty close. It's a 1,528 official that I know of.
Okay.
That I was able to count out. And we're not counting Patreon, and we're not counting early things. And I know that there's 5,000 articles or more on Jim Hill Media. So we add them together. I think we're we're Wicked adjacent, right?
8,700 is nothing to sniff at. So
no, that's quite impressive. Well, Jim, that is awesome. Thank you to them, number one. But we also have some thanks. We hit it. We got over 100 reviews by 100.
And only one crabby guy, right?
Right. The crabby one was just not really sure. I guess we mansplain a little too much on this show, and we a lot of hypotheticals that we like to think. But that's part of the fun, isn't it?
Oh, well, he's got me dead to rights for mansplaining. I mean, I'm not going to debate that.
No. Well, here we ended up with 105 as of this recording, so thank you, and we'll continue to read these on if you want to keep going. We'd be happy, but we hit that 100, and we really, really thank you. So here's a couple. Boston Celts up in your neck of the woods said it's fantastic, a welcome dose of Universal and a sea of Disney podcasts. Hosts are knowledgeable and fun to listen to. And once again, one knowledgeable, we both can be fun, right? But you know what you're talking about. Mm-hmm. Here's one, excellent companion to the Disney Dish from Scott. This is an excellent podcast regarding Universal Parks. If you like what the Disney Dish with Jim Hill and Len Testa, you'll love this one too. Great job. So I always say I'm a Timu Len.
Wow, we get a lot of Timu stuff here at the house. I'm trying to wean Nancy off of it, but no, I would definitely put you, in Mr. Testa's category. I mean, again, you bring fun
give
stuff.
me a couple more years.
Okay, well, all right,
all right. And last one it's from Keeter WP, informative and fun. I love listening to Jim and Eric on my walks. It's like walking and talking with friends. They cover interesting Universal history, present day happenings. It's enjoyable listen each each week. Thanks for all you do and keep us in the know. So thank you, guys. That is fantastic. And we love going on walks as well. It's a lot easier on my feet than probably yours, sitting here in the podcast chair.
In my case, I have to persuade Nancy to walk in front of me dragging a box of donuts, but it will. It motivates me to walk.
There we go. Well, if anybody else wants to give us a review, we would love them. It helps us find, helps people find us, really. And whether they give us a 2-star and say we mansplain, or they give us a 5-star because we go on their walks, we're happy with any review and feedback. So you can go to jimhillmedia.com/epic. It takes you right to the Apple review page. Thanks again to Boston Celts, Scott, and Keeter WP. And we'll be reading more until we catch them all.
Cool. All right. Well, again, for our 100th episode, we actually, for you Disney Dish listeners out there, we do have a kind of a cool story that straddles both worlds. It's a Disney story about Universal. And we'll get to that later on in today's show. But before we get to that and the news that Eric's chased down for this week, we, of course, have to mention our sponsor, which is unlockmagic.com. And if you're planning a trip to Universal Orlando or the Walt Disney World Resort, check out unlockmagic.com. Listeners to the Epic Universal podcast are saving up to 12% on theme park tickets and now have the ability to purchase Express Pass through Unlock Magic, saving even more money. So be sure and visit unlockmagic.com and save today. So, and speaking of today, what Universal-related news have you chased down today for our listeners, Eric?
Well, I think we're going to rehash a little bit of what we talked about last week, but we actually have some confirmation. So we talked last week about the photo validation at Epic Universe, the portals where we have the face scans, and we were all hypothetically saying, well, it could be this, it could be that, it could be this. Well, not only did they come out on their website and explain what exactly it is, we still can do some hypotheticals too, because I'm not 100% trusting it. So they went on the website. Universal basically confirmed the photo validation technology will be used for entry to individual worlds at Epic Universe during certain operational periods. Essentially what they're saying is if the lands get at full capacity, then that can stop people from having, basically saying, hey, we need some people to leave before you can go in, which it's for their virtual line usage. So we've seen this before in Disney, right? We've had lands, didn't Star Wars have a virtual queue to get in the land when they first opened at maybe Disneyland?
I want to say yes, but what was interesting is I think that lasted a day and a half. It was just one of those things where we are absolutely sure that giant they're not here. So,
well, my thing is, okay, I know we all speculated that, all right, well, it's to keep, paying guests to go in so that way we can have unpaying guests. And Universal put this out it's on their official website explaining that it's all about getting in there for capacity levels. We're not anywhere close right now, Jim, to seeing these lands at capacity, right?
No,
I mean,
no.
Not anything I've seen.
No. But again, if, we've talked about this on the show, that there is this prevailing theory out there in regard to what's going to happen at night at Epic Universe, kicking open the gates so people can come in to Celestial Park, watch the nighttime show, and dine in the restaurants, do a little shopping, and with the notion of the portals are the only way into the actual lands, and the only people who will be allowed into the portals are people whose faces get recognized, that they have the right admission material. And if, on the other hand, you've just strolled through the gate and, you think you can, sneak into Burke and, it's not going to work out well for you. But again, we haven't seen this version of the plan actually executed yet. Hell, we haven't even seen the nighttime fountain show. Right. We've seen tests for it, and we've seen, I think we talked on the last show about them draining the fountain and working on it. So the nighttime show seems imminent. And didn't we Do we have a name?
Yeah, they copyright. It's escaping me at the moment exactly what it was, but they have a trademark name.
Okay.
Well, Jim, let me ask you this, okay? So if we're worried about, if we're thinking that, hey, these lands might get filled real quick, and we need to be able to validate how many people are in there, and when people leave, we can go back in and kind of worry about that. Don't you think there's one real easy way to make sure the lands get filled real quick, and that would be to open up annual passes? Like, is that are they maybe prepping to say, all right, we've heard you guys, you want annual passes. Like I said on last week's show, we just bought an annual pass because they were giving us a buy 12, get 15 months kind of deal. So I think they might be hurting, or they at least want that, or the crowd attendance. And maybe they're like, all right, we'll let everybody in, but we're going to protect the capacity. So do you think that could be a possibility?
Let's be honest here. The 2026, between what's been going on tourism-wise, look, Orlando isn't having the same problems that Vegas is having. But on the other hand, when you look at the various specials that Disney is offering, Kids Fun Summer and that sort of thing, reading between the lines, Florida is having some concerns. And certainly, face it, the... putting an annual pass out there for Epic Universe, that is, that's low-hanging fruit. There's people who jump on that in a heartbeat.
Right. And you would need to cap the lands at that point in time, because you would definitely you'll get to 100% capacity real quick. Yeah. So that's a possibility. So we'll keep an eye on it and see how it's used. I don't think it's been used officially yet, it seems to me like they're kind of looking at it.
I do not think you were wrong here. What concerns me, again, I think back to that survey you shared 2 and 3 shows ago, where they were talking about the various annual passes for Epic, and the notion of, hey, this pass will give you 10, visits a year. And they still seem to be, be tamping on the brake, even with the annual passes they're considering for that park. The notion of throttling the number of people who can get in. And I'm just going to be fascinated as we head into this summer, just watching, what in fact does get announced.
Yeah. No, and Jim, before we move on to the next story, I'd want to let everybody know that, and Jim, I don't know if you knew that I was corrected on several occasions, so thanks for everybody to send this in. Jim, you can get individual lightning lanes at Disney. You can't, like, where I thought you had to buy the entire package and then be able to spend an extra $12, $15, $25 to do Guardians. You can just buy Guardians for $25. So the Express Pass that we talked about last week, the Express Now, which I said, hey, that's not a bad deal if you want to skip the line because you don't have to do that. It does turn out at some point in time, Disney has allowed that as well. So thanks for everybody that sent that in over to us. And next time I go to Epcot, I am going to look at the Guardians a little closer, because I might be willing to fork out an extra $20 to do that ride. Where before I was like, I can't do the whole thing. So little correction from last week's episode. So thanks for sending that along, guys.
Okay. But to be fair here, Lightning Lane it's this close to being stereo instructions. It is so ridiculously complex at this point that, in its various iterations, that, there's a number of us who just throw up our hands. It's not...
that was me. I think that's what happened. I think when it first came out, this might have been the rule, or could have been the rule. And I said, well, I'll never do it. So I just did not follow up anymore. I'm like, I'm not paying to do this. If I do whatever. And I just assumed. So somewhere it changed, or somewhere I misinterpreted it. And when I was correcting and I was telling somebody, I'm like, I'm blaming Disney on this one. I'll take ownership for not knowing, but I'm also blaming Disney for making it too darn, confusing.
I don't know. So, and that's the thing when, I would just want to go in the tilt-a-whirl. All right, let's talk for an hour before I explain to you how you should how should arrange several days in advance to go on the tilt-a-whirl.
Jim, you're more of a cinema guy than I am, and I know you and Drew were talking about CinemaCon and so forth. But I did see that Universal had some showing at CinemaCon. We had Steven Spielberg's Disclosure Day was shown.
Yes.
And some of the Odyssey, I think.
Well, first of all, by the way, this is Mr. Spielberg's first appearance at CinemaCon. And, so kind of a big deal. And again, important thing to remember about Disclosure Day, this is him returning to the world of UFOs. And again, this is Mr. Close Encounters and Mr. E.T. the Extraterrestrial. So kind of significant.
Yeah.
And on the other hand, Christopher Nolan and the Odyssey, what was so funny when he was on stage at the Coliseum, and again, you got to appreciate somebody on stage, talking about Homer's, the Odyssey, at a place called the Coliseum. But he was stressing, it's like, look, this isn't a story. This is the story, like the first story. And, he's been trying to make this forever. So, and evidently the exhibitors were impressed by this, but at the same time, these are guys who, they just want movies in their theaters so they can sell $7 sodas and $10 bog tubs of popcorn. And so they were just as happy with the footage that they got to see from Minions and Monsters, the new Illuminations film. Yeah.
What we got a couple other ones. We had a horror for Other Mommy and Werewolf that was shown. And then Violent Night 2. Did you know there was a Violent Night 2 coming out? And Kristen Bell is in this. So I knew David Harbour was there, but Kristen Bell, that's a take for Anna.
Have you ever actually watched the original Violent Night? Again, it's a hard R where, Santa is battling with assassins, trying to get back to the sleigh and the reindeer. And I caught it one night, here at the house again. I only get the television for 20 minutes at night when Nancy finishes watching whatever she's watching and goes to the bathroom and gets ready to go to bed. I get 20 minutes. Right. And, and this was on. And I wound up getting sucked in for the full, it's funny. It's a super, in fact, they make no bones about it because there's a kid component in the story. This is a super, super violent take for whole stretches of this thing on Home Alone. It's Joe Pesci only getting repeatedly killed. And it was surprisingly good. And I have to say, if Kristen Bell is playing Mrs. Claus, I may have to watch, Violent Night 2, just to, I would imagine just the duality of, oh, yes, here's the voice of sweet Anna.
Yeah.
But she's wielding a machete now, as she makes Santa cookies. So, no, I guess I'll have to check that out. On the other hand, I'm going to just say this out loud. I didn't have any unanswered questions in regard to the Fokker films. Yeah. And the fact that we're now about to get Fokker in law, though, the fact that Adriana from Wicked is I guess playing the newest member of the family, and then she's the one who's now hassling Ben Stiller. That could work.
Yeah. I think so they had their showing. I think there were announcements for a Snoop Dogg biopic, which seems interesting, an adaptation of Jane Austen's Sense and Sensibility. But yeah, this was interesting. And, for me, I'm not necessarily a film buff. I do enjoy movies, but I look at it from hey, what could make it to the parks? Do you think any of the films or anything that was showed today has legs to make it to a park? I'm thinking a Violent Night 2 would be a very nice Halloween Horror Nights.
Oh, that would definitely work. And look, we have seen anything that shows up in the Minions movies eventually does filter back into the parks. But beyond that, that's I'm not sure.
Well, the Odyssey, if it turns out to be a real epic, I don't know. This is anything that shows up in the parks is years off unless it's a great character and so forth. But figured would be worth bringing up to to everybody, to let everybody know what kind of movies are out there. This is what they're touting as the big 2026 movie. So we'll see how it goes, and if there's any huge successes, that's when they sometimes character meet and greets or weird shop that shows up. But yeah, we'll keep an eye on that.
Okay, all right. So But again, the interesting thing about these films that are coming into theaters very soon is I don't think any of them will be in theaters by May 10th. So if you're looking for something to do with mom on Mother's Day, don't take her to the movies. But you can, in fact, take her to the Universal Orlando Resort because they have a bunch of brunch options. Is that right?
They do. So I brought this up not necessarily to give you guys the entire menu, but just to let you know that there are some deals going on for locals or anybody that's traveling down there to show the mothers in your life a wonderful time. There are some good deals going on, but I was very interested in I just realized I never really thought of hotel dining and Universal and dining hasn't really collided in my fandom yet. So I just wanted to get a couple your thoughts on some of these, see if you've ever ate at those or if any hidden secrets of next time I go. But as we do that, I'll give you some of the deals going on. So at the Kitchen, which is at the Hard Rock Hotel, they definitely are having some gourmet buffet and carving stations, made to order pasta, smoked salmon, and desserts. And this is from $85 for adults and $40 for children. Real quick, Islands Dining Room at Royal Pacific doing something very similar with Pan-Asian inspired brunch buffet, similar pricing. Amatista Cookhouse at Sapphire Falls. Did I get that one right?
You did. You did.
Okay. Caribbean-inspired prefix menu, and this is a little, it's $65 per person. And then the Trattoria del Porto at Portofino Bay will have a breakfast buffet hours, and that's $36 for adults and $18 for children. So if you're looking to that, your parking will be validated at each hotel with a minimum of $40 purchase, and you need recommendations for reservations you should call or book. But the bigger question here, Jim, is food at Universal. Why have I not fallen into this yet? I mean, at Disney, you hear about food all the freaking time. Are Universal foodies not as prevalent, or did I just not fall in that algorithm?
Well, I mean, to be honest, these four restaurants that you're talking about are actually at the hotels. And, remember, you've just begun going to the Universal parks. We're going to have to, this next time we're down, maybe spend a day or so actually wandering around some of the hotels and because I've had meals at the Kitchen. It's great. I have had the Amatista Cookhouse there at Sapphire Falls. Nancy and I have had breakfast there a bunch of times. Even the Trattoria over at Portofino, done breakfast a lot there before heading out, for press events. And these are all good, solid places, something that mom will enjoy. So, if you're in the Orlando area and looking for something to do, something different for Mother's Day, going to Universal might actually be a fun thing to try.
Yeah, so I think I got my associate's degree for Universal, right? And now to go the next level, to get my bachelor's, I got to start hitting up these hotels, right? I think that's for the next 100 is to eat everything, to go everywhere. And here's a cheap plug for everybody out there. You guys did a wonderful episode on the Case 4 where you guys argue the deluxe resorts. You, Len, and Chris Cox talk about that, and I'm like, I need to go to these places. It's one of those things that is on my 2026 bucket list when I go down there to start visiting and hopefully stay at some of these. Maybe we'll grab some food on the way.
All right. Sounds like a plan. So, all right. So we're talking about a plan involving Universal's future, but sadly, something that's about to become part of Universal's past, at least over at Universal Studios Japan, we just got news about.
Yeah. And these next two stories are kind of combined together because I have theories and or questions for you. But Sesame Street Fun World at Universal Studios Japan is closing permanently. So this is the first time I've heard of this. Obviously, I had to learn about the stateside parks before we can venture off into Japan. I believe that is probably the master's, right? When we start going international, that's how I get my master's degree.
There we go.
Doctorate, we'll go from there. But Sesame Street Fun World is going to close on May 10th after opening. This was since 2012, so it's been there for 13 years. and they're doing a farewell celebration called Forever Friends, Always Together. And you can get memory snapshot cards featuring Elmo and the other characters, and there's also going to be treasure boards available near the attractions. And essentially, they're ending this. But Jim, we talked before about Sesame Street being on the parade floats. I think they're in one of the current parades and stuff. But yeah, I mean, this seems to be like a fixture that they're going away with. Any idea of why, or just it's time?
Well, all right. You have to understand that Sesame Street has been associated with Universal Japan since I want to say before 2012. There was the 3D movie with Elmo.
Okay.
In fact, Kevin Clash, the gentleman who did Elmo. I mean, at some point I'll tell you stories off air about evidently Mr. Clash and how he treated the Universal Creative Department down in Florida, and then Elmo not so nice. So for me, what kind of intrigues me about the timing of this is, weren't you just a show or two ago talking about the Sesame Street character? No.
The Peanut characters are there. Like, Japan just sounds like a fever dream of characters, of IP. Let me ask you about this next story then, because I think it plays in. So this is, and I've held on this for a couple weeks because I want opinions and it didn't really fit in. So did you see the Sesame Workshop sued SeaWorld over unpaid royalties and abrupt Sesame Place San Diego closure? So, for those not familiar, there were some scuffles, and this was early March, maybe, but there was a federal lawsuit against SeaWorld and their parent company, United Parks and Resorts, alleging millions of unpaid royalties and saying that they shut down the Sesame Place San Diego, so they didn't have to pay royalties. So there's obviously some collision there, and I believe they shut down the Sesame Street area in Orlando SeaWorld. Did they shut that down recently? Which I've been to. I think that's because of potential issues here. So my big thing is, Jim, if SeaWorld would lose that, would Universal, does it even make sense? Would they want to try to get that for their statewide parks? Do you think Sesame Street is an IP that would really help maybe close some of that young child gap? Or does Mark Woodbury, who believes that, hey, we got enough IP, we don't need anybody else's, do you think he'd even care?
I think you said the magic name, Mark Woodbury. I mean, and again, if this were 15 years ago, prior to there being a Despicable Me and, Illuminations having its amazing run at the box office. Likewise, prior to Universal purchasing DreamWorks. At this point, the Universal Parks have two animation studios that are producing hits hand over fist. So, the interesting thing, in fact, I'm going to use the Mr. Schul's language here. I mean, it would be nice, to have Sesame Street in the Universal Parks, but it's not necessary. It's kind of a needs-must situation. We got the Illuminations, we got Illuminations, we got DreamWorks, Nintendo is exploding.
Yeah.
And Sesame Street, let's be honest, Sesame Street has been around since 1968, 1969. And when's the last time they had a Tickle Me Elmo?
Yeah, and young kids, as much as I tried to get Miles into Sesame Street and all that as much as possible because I feel like it's the best entertainment you can watch. They just watch YouTube. It was like a struggle to get them. So I'm just wondering if their popularity is fading and that, at this case in time, I would love them to either make up with SeaWorld because I do like seeing Sesame Street in parks. I did enjoy that land probably the most out of the SeaWorld portions. It's super cool to walk down Sesame Street. But I was like, well, if they're over there, maybe there's a relationship. Maybe it would be a nice little slide. But yeah, it's interesting to see. There's so many IPs that Universal has developed, plus some that are on the table with the Nintendo and the Pokemon and, kind of situation. It's like, I think they would rather go after those. So I'm glad we got to bring it up in this conversation. I'm glad I got to ask you.
No. I mean,
SeaWorld adjacent, because you don't have a SeaWorld podcast yet, right, Jim?
I do not yet. On the other hand, every so often I eyeball the Muppets, and by the way, I don't know if your bride has put you on notice yet, but what is it? They are opening in May a Disney store, a pop-up Disney store in Pittsburgh, and
I know.
And Lauren and I were hatching a plan to, we've been talking about going down to Philly to catch the Universal exhibit at the Franklin Institute. And it's like, Lauren's now like, ooh, we'll go to Pittsburgh, we'll check out the store, we'll go to Philly, we'll see the thing at the Franklin Institute. And I figured, well, while we're there, if you want to further your Sesame Street related knowledge, there is, of course, Sesame Place.
I've been there, Jim. I've been there a long time ago. It's in Philadelphia.
It is. Same thing.
Yeah, I would go.
All right.
Our plans, Jim, we just don't have enough days on the calendar for everything that we want to do.
No, we do
but
not.
we're going to try. Yes, no,
Okay.
that is certainly road trips for the Herseys and the Hills. So.
Okay. All right. Well, folks, that brings us to the end of the news portion of our 100th episode. And when we get back from this break, we're going to share that Disney Universal related story that I thought you folks might enjoy. But before that, there's this.
LinkedIn is pretty amazing at helping you grow your small business. We cannot make your email response time faster. We can help you sell, market, and hire in one place. We cannot help you find space for your 3 desk drinks. Why do you have 3? And while we can't help you find the perfect volume for your presentation video, LinkedIn can help you find the perfect audience for your business. Grow your small business on LinkedIn. Learn more at linkedin.com/smallbusiness.
This episode is brought to you by Perfect Bistro Cat Food. Hey guys, today I'm interviewing my cat about his perfect bistro food. Percy, you seem to be a big Perfect Bistro fan. Care to comment? Totally. What do you like about it? You love the high-quality ingredients? And the delicious flavors, of course. Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. Listen to Percy, guys. Visit perfectbistro.com to try it for your cat.
And we're back. Now, Eric, this is a story that I'm pretty sure you as a Disney fan have already heard. We're going to share kind of a different take on it. It starts Saturday, September 26, 1953. And after a full day of work at the art department of 20th Century Fox, Herbie Ryman is at home that morning. He's looking forward to spending some time in his home art studio. He's going to do a little painting. But this is when he gets a call from Dick Irvine. Now, Dick and Herbie, they share some history. They both worked at Disney Studios in the early 40s. But after World War II, that ends in August of 45. Both Irvine and Ryman, they leave the Mouse House. They head on over to 20th Century Fox, where they begin working as art directors on live-action films. But where this got interesting is that the year previous, 1952, Walt had quietly hired Dick away from 20th Century Fox to come work on a mystery project. Not a movie, not a TV show, something different. And on this specific Saturday morning, Dick and Walt are now looking for Herbie's help. Again, on this mystery project. And what Irvin is calling Ryman about is, Dick is wondering if Herbie could come by Disney Studios today, the Saturday, because Walt has something he wants to talk to Herbie about in person. And so Ryman, interested, put down his brush, drives over to the Disney lot in Burbank, and Walt actually meets Herbie at the guard shack. And then the two of them walk back to a quiet corner on the lot. Walt pulls out a ring of keys and starts unlocking doors, and, and eventually, Ryman finds himself back in a workroom where the walls are covered with artwork for what looks like an amusement park. And this is when Walt brings Herbie into his confidence that the Disney organization is planning on building a family fun park. at a yet-to-be-determined location, by the way. In fact, this coming Monday morning, that's September 28th, 1953, Walt's brother Roy is supposed to be flying all the way to New York City to meet with the money men. To be specific, the heads of the three major television networks at the time, CBS, NBC, ABC, to try to convince these guys to invest in this project, which back then is called Disneylandia, or maybe just Disneyland. And the idea is they'll front Walt the money, and in exchange, Walt will then produce a weekly television series for that network. And where Herbie enters the equation is the previous night, Friday, September 25th. Walt's brother Roy mentions in passing that it would be a whole lot easier to sell these suits in New York on Disneyland if he had a piece of artwork to show them, something that would provide a rough approximation of what a Disneyland might look like. So this is when Dick Irvine, who was basically the lead art director on Disneyland, he tells Walt, okay, if Roy's serious, we should probably reach out to Herbie Ryman. From the various live action productions that Dick and Herbie had worked on together over at 20th Century Fox, Irvine knew that, there was just no one better at delivering highly detailed drawings on a deadline than Ryman. So, even so, when initially offered this opportunity, Herbie's like, no. It's like, right. I mean, just the idea that the fate of this passion project that Walt has already invested hundreds of thousands of dollars of his own family's money into developing would now rest on the quality of whatever drawing Herbie was able to churn out, in less than 48 hours now. And then just the task of producing a highly detailed drawing of an entire amusement park, again, in under 48 hours, that just seemed impossible.
Right. I remember seeing, Jim, that I've seen Herbie's interviews on a couple of the YouTube videos and stuff, and when Walt was explaining, Herbie's like, oh, I'd love to see this drawing, as if like he didn't even know he was at it.
You're going to do it.
Yeah, that's exactly. He's like, oh, am I? Okay.
Yeah, right. Well, this is what Walt says to Herbie. He said, all right, well, what if I stayed here with you? I guided you through the process, explained how I think anyway, how all the pieces of Disneylandia are supposed to fit together. Would that make things easier? And Herbie's response was, well, not necessarily easier, but at least doable. And so Walt takes Herbie's comment as a yes. So he turns to Dick and says, go get food and lots of coffee. And then Disney and Ryman adjourn to a nearby drawing table where Walt then begins to walk Herbie through the key components of Disneylandia. Things like True Life Adventureland and Frontier Country and the World of Tomorrow, where those are going to go in the park. Now, Eric, I was lucky enough to get the opportunity to interview Herbie Ryman. I first met the guy at Disneyland's 30th anniversary celebration in July of 1985. And then I got to do a formal sit-down with the guy the following year, summer of 86. Sadly, that was the only time I ever got to interview Ryman. By the fall of 88, the poor guy was bedridden with cancer, and we lost Herbie at the age of 78 in February of 89. But this story, the one where Herbie and Walt were locked away in an office on the Disney lot, bent over a drawing table for an entire weekend, because they needed to finish this presentation, drawing by Monday morning. Otherwise, Roy would have nothing to show, nothing to take with him when he flew out to New York and meet with the money guys, these three heads of the networks. This story always fascinated me, which is why I then had to ask Ryman, I mean, it's just you and Walt in that room for hours at a time. What did you two talk about? And Ryman's response was, well, I asked Walt how he knew that this thing was going to work. I mean, I had worked as an art director on live-action films, and which is where you have to deliver one consistent vision for a movie's overall world. This is what then allows filmmakers to tell a cohesive story, something, where moviegoers aren't then distracted by things that are visually inconsistent, the things that'll take them out of the story. Says, whereas, Walt's describing Disneyland to me, and it's nothing but visual inconsistencies. It's a medieval castle next door to a cavalry fort. It's a spaceship looming up over a turn-of-the-century town. It's like, how are any of these visuals going to come together and make a pleasing whole? And what Walt Disney then reportedly told Ryman floored him. Walt tells Herbie, it's like, I know Disneylandia will work because I've already seen it. Hell, I've already actually walked through it 30 years ago when I first arrived in Hollywood. And what is Disney talking about? Eric, would you believe the lower lot at Universal City in Hollywood? All right. We'll get to that part of the story in a sec. But first, this. And we're back. So, okay, just a reminder, folks. Carl Laemmle sets up his Universal Film Manufacturing Company in a quiet, remote corner of the San Fernando Valley in 1912. In just 3 years' time, Eric, this 230-acre complex would transform into Universal City, the world's first self-contained community which is dedicated entirely to movie making. Picture that in your mind if we now jump 8 years ahead, specifically to the late summer of 1923, which is when Walt Disney first arrives out in LA looking to work in the film industry. It's in this very same window of time, we're talking September of 1923, that Universal Pictures is first sending one of its classic horror films, The Hunchback of Notre Dame, out into theaters. And Carl Laemmle had spared no expense when it came to making this Lon Chaney film. Artists and technicians at Universal had built a 19-acre set that faithfully recreated a 15th century Paris, with the centerpiece of this project being, of course, a 60-foot tall recreation of the Cathedral of Notre Dame. And important to stress here, this 19-acre complex was largely left standing on the Universal lower lot for the next year. And so this is what Walt Disney spends a week not only exploring the Hunchback of Notre Dame set, but all of the other sets at Universal City after he snuck onto the Universal lot.
This isn't the Disney that we know from Famous. This is before he's caught a big break, right?
Well, she's a 21-year-old kid.
Okay, yeah.
And by the way, snuck is the right term, folks, because in order to gain access to the Universal lot, again, late summer of 1923, Walt would first show a business card to the guard at the gate. That wasn't entirely truthful. It said that Walt Disney was an employee of the Universal Newsreel division, to be specific, the Kansas City branch of the Newsreel division. And all right, so using the very same camera that he did, his animated shorts with the Laugh-O-Grams, back in 1922, Walt had filmed a Shriners Parade as it marched through Kansas City, and Walt had then turned around and sold the footage of that parade to the Kansas City branch of Universal's Newsreel division, but that didn't make Walt an employee of Universal. Now, this, however, didn't stop Walt from getting some business cards made up that then said this. And according to what Ryman told me in 1986, Disney had evidently somehow gotten his hands on a really for real business card of an actual Universal Newsreel employee, and Walt supposedly knew a guy who was a printer who took him the business card and said, I would like a couple of these these with my name on it. Because that was the thing. Now you have to remember again, he's only a 21-year-old guy, and he's desperate to break into show business, and become a director of live action films out in Hollywood. And that's the other part of the story that Herbie shared that was kind of shocking. That when Walt first arrived out in L.A., he had decided, I'm done with animation. And the reason for this was Laugh-O-Grams was in the middle of bankruptcy. And again, that's out in Kansas City. In fact, the bankruptcy wouldn't be fully, filed till October of that same year, 1923. And, Walt basically, I guess, had been told by the attorney, you should probably not do animation for a while. Your creditors will come looking for you. But here's the thing. He had in his suitcase a reel of film. This was the proof of concept for his Alice in Cartoonland movies. But the way the Walt looked at it is like, well, look, if you actually watch this thing, it's mostly live action. It's me, and it's then 4-year-old Virginia Davis, and we're mugging for the camera, and we're looking at, the little bits of animation we crammed into this thing. So Walt was thinking that this is a great way to show people what I could do to direct a live action film. So this is why he kept sneaking onto the Universal lot. Again, every day for a week in the late summer of 1923, Walt would show up at the gate guard shack. He would show his business card. The guard would wave him onto the lot, and then Walt would spend the next couple of hours banging on doors, trying to get people to look at his reel. And when the banging on the doors didn't pan out, Walt would then wander around the Universal lot. And he'd find himself in places like Six Points, that famous tangle of streets where Universal shot most of its silent westerns. And Walt would stand off to the side, trying not to be noticed, as he observed how a real live-action director, actually, worked the film set out in Hollywood. But eventually, look, Walt's luck ran out. Again, to hear Herbie tell this story, Disney lingered a little too long on the side of one live-action set. Security was called. Walt was then escorted off of the Universal lot. And then to make sure that this didn't happen again, his bogus Kansas City office of the newsreel division business card was confiscated and torn up. But here's the thing, Eric. By then, Walt had seen what he needed to see. He had seen how a place like Universal's lower lot, where Western saloons could be just around the corner from castles, could still be the seemingly weird collection of things, but also this really fun place to explore. And what I always thought was fascinating is, remember, Walt had been over in France with the American Red Cross, and so I always thought it was fascinating that a Walt Disney who'd been to the real France is now walking around the 19-acre fake France, with the Hunchback of Notre Dame. But anyway, look, again, if we're being completely honest here, folks, we have to admit that we now owe the original Disneyland, the happiest place on earth, to Walt Disney spending a week doing something he probably shouldn't have been doing, again, sneaking onto the Universal lot in Hollywood. Though there's another part of the story that Herbie shared with me. By the way, this was he learned this from Walt's brother Roy in the weeks just before Disneyland opened in the summer of '55. And so this story, Ryman talks about. He's at Disneyland. He's at the work site. He's art directing. They're doing something on Main Street. I think what Herbie was explaining to me is they were pouring the concrete around the trolley track at the park. And Herbie's there just making sure that, it's the right color, it's the right consistency. But out of the corner of his eye, he notices that Roy Disney is there too, again, standing there watching as they pour and smooth out the concrete. So given that this is his boss's brother, Herbie walks up to Roy and makes a polite conversation. And yet eventually the the topic of whether Disneyland is actually going to make its previously announced opening date of July 17th comes up, and Walt's brother, at this point, just seems kind of resigned to the fact that, well, Disneyland is either going to open on time or it's not. At this point, there's literally nothing Roy can do, one way or the other to change that outcome. And Herbie's kind of struck by this kind of matter-of-fact response. And so he presses the conversation, and it's like, so what are you guys going to do if it doesn't work? What if we open Disneyland next week and the people don't come? Whenever they don't show up, what are you going to do then? And Roy supposedly snorts, and it's like, well, that place then becomes Hollywood's newest, most expensive backlot. It's like, and he proceeds he points at Sleeping Beauty Castle. We'll shoot the swashbucklers over there, and gestures toward Frontierland. We'll do the westerns there, and then our sci-fi. You can see they're putting up the rocket, in Tomorrowland, behind Main Street. Yeah, we'll do our sci-fi things over there. And, Herbie, Roy at that point claps Herbie on the shoulder and says, don't worry, we'll figure it out. Or not. And it's just, what struck Ryman about this whole conversation is that at this point, the Disney company has already spent $15 million. And over the next 2 weeks, an additional $2 million, just, doing whatever they can to get the place across the finish line. And, here's Walt's brother. Rather than being all stressed about the huge financial hole that the company has now found itself in, it's being all sorts of philosophical about the project. Saying things like, maybe we'll turn it into a backlot. Or not. All right. Anyway, in conclusion, looking back over today's feature and how Walt sneaking onto the Universal lot back in 1923, later supposedly served as the inspiration for much of the artwork that Herbie Ryman created to help sell the initial idea of Disneyland to those TV executives in 53. There is a part of me, Eric, that wonders, maybe this is why when then Universal Pictures head Jules Stein, when he comes to Walt Disney some 10 years later, we're now talking 1963, and says, hey, we're thinking of trying to turn the old Universal tour into a Southern California tourist attraction. And Walt immediately, hey, I can help you with that. There's a part of me that thinks that must have been Walt, trying to find a way to make up for sneaking onto the Universal lot in Hollywood some 40 years earlier.
Oh, geez. You know what he did? He reached in his back pocket and says, I haven't used this for 40 years. And he pulled out his little business card. He says,
there we go.
That is great. No, that is a fantastic story. I didn't know anything about him sneaking on and doing any of that. And you talking to Herb Ryman, who is like, we've all seen a lot of his quotes and interviews over the years. He seemed great. He seemed fascinating.
He was as delightful in person as he is in all of those interviews. In fact, I don't know if I've told you how I met him. I had been invited out. Again, I was a 71Q, an Army journalist. And again, I wrote my Donald Duck retired from the Army story, and Disney reached out and said, hey, we're doing the 30th anniversary of Disneyland. Do you want to come cover it? And I'm like, yes! So they had an actual ceremony on the day of the 30th, July 17, 1985. And, you better believe, they laid the little white chairs down in Town Square. And as soon as the press could get in there, I was in there. And I was in the first row behind the dignitaries. And so, I'm sitting there, and eventually the rows in front of us start to fill with these older gentlemen. And this tall, thin guy sits next to this short, little man in a blue and white suit and white curly hair. And, the two of them start talking, and I'm really not eavesdropping, but I am, Eric.
Yeah, sure.
And the tall, thin man with the mustache says, not like it was 30 years ago. And and Herbie laughs. Says, yeah, that this was about when the asphalt was still loose. And I realized, holy crap, that's John Hench, and that's Herbie Ryman. And, and I literally, I don't know what possessed me. I leaned forward at that moment and said, gentlemen, I'm sorry. I don't want to disrupt your private conversation, but you're John Hench and you're Herbie Ryman. And you got to remember, this is the mid-'80s, Eric. Disney and the Disney fandom is in, not exactly.
No, there's no
so
YouTube. We don't have Twitter. We don't know what these people look like, right? You proved that you're a real fan.
Yeah.
Or at least knew what you're in the know.
And well, that was the thing. So they weren't used to being recognized.
Right.
They started a little bit, and I just wanted to say, I'm here. I'm out here from New England. I'm covering the 30th celebration, and just want to tell you, I so appreciate what you two did here, and thanks for everything you've done. And the two of them open like flowers, and then but then it's the back row. And so all of their friends start to sit down, and here's Mark and Alice Davis, and here's Ward Kimball. And they keep introducing me to these guys. And and suddenly I'm being handed business cards, and it's like, oh, you're in town covering an opening? Oh, all the way out from New England? Oh, you got to come up to Imagineering. Let's do an interview. And this is that's literally the moment that kicked open the door. I got to meet all of these guys there. But at the same time, you got to remember that so many of these guys, like Harper Goff, worked at Disney, but then went over, he was the Jungle Cruise guy, but then went over and did the Glamour Trams for Universal. So there was so much cross-pollination even back then. But no, again, these two histories weave in and out of each other, and will continue to weave in and out of each other in the future.
Listen, Jim, I think it's number one, perfect story for our 100th, because let's look at it. You get someone like myself in here to basically say, hey, Jim, we should do a Universal podcast. You need a Universal co-host. You need to do this. And we're like, well, who the heck are we going to get? And sooner or later, we're like, well, let's just do it. And now you get someone, Disney fan, Universal fan, completely. It all mixes together, and it proves that even if Disney can be a fan of Universal, we all can. So it's what a good story, great way for 100. Heck of a job, Jim.
Well, I'm very, very much looking forward to our next 100 shows. So on that note, folks, that's going to do it for this week. So, by the way, if you have topics or suggestions that you'd like Eric and I to explore, please feel free to send those along to us through social media. And with that, just want to thank you again for listening to the Epic Universal podcast, and Mr. Hersey and I will be back next week.